Along the shores of Lake Michigan, in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, two very different communities once stood facing one another, separated not by distance but by culture, history, and time. On one side of the Sturgeon River was Sandtown, a Native American community whose people lived in close relationship with the water, the land, and the sturgeon fish that sustained them. This shoreline was not just a place to live, it was a place of meaning, tradition, and continuity stretching back generations. Across the river stood Nahma, a town whose very name comes from a Native American word meaning sturgeon, a symbol of wisdom and longevity. Yet Nahma would become something very different, a company town shaped by industry rather than tradition. Established as early as 1856, Nahma grew into a major lumber and sawmill community during the height of operations under the Bay de Noc Company. At its peak, more than 1,200 workers were employed here, and the town bustled with homes, businesses, docks, rail lines, and the constant sound of saws along the bay. But as forests were cut and the timber resource was exhausted, Nahma's purpose faded. In 1951, the entire town, buildings, homes, and all, was put up for sale, marking the end of an era built on extraction rather than permanence. Today, the river still flows between these two places. One community vanished quietly into history, the other nearly disappeared when the industry left, and in that space between them lies a deeper story about land, displacement, survival, and what remains long after the saws fell silent. Along the sandy southern shoreline of Lake Michigan, just across from the Sturgeon River, from the lumber town of Nahma, once stood a small Native American settlement known locally as Sandtown. Unlike Nahma, Sandtown was never formally platted, never advertised, and never owned by a company. It existed quietly, largely undocumented, yet deeply connected to the land and water that sustained it. The Native American people of Sandtown were primarily Ottawa, as well as Ojibwa and Potawatomi people. These families did not arrive suddenly. They were part of a much older Native presence along the Lake Michigan shoreline, one that predated European settlement, lumber mills, and company towns. The location of Sandtown was intentional. The sandy shoreline provided access to fish, especially sturgeon and whitefish, while the river mouth offered transportation, seasonal camps, and trade routes. This area had been used for generations as a place to live, fish, gather, and move between inland and coastal sites. Sandtown represented continuity in a time of rapid change. Families in Sandtown lived in small, simple structures, often described in local accounts as shacks or crude cabins. These homes were typically built from salvaged lumber, driftwood, and reused materials, sometimes obtained from mill scraps across the river. Housing conditions were modest and often harsh. There was no formal infrastructure, limited access to clean water, and little protection from Lake Michigan winds and winter storms. Despite this, the community persisted, adapting rather than relocating. Exact population numbers are unknown, but most estimates suggest several dozen people, likely 10 to 20 households depending on the season. Sandtown was not a large village. It functioned more like a permanent seasonal settlement during growing season and fishing months, and shrinking during winter and when families traveled elsewhere. Livelihood in Sandtown centered on subsistence and informal labor. Fishing was primary, both for food and limited trade. Families also hunted, gathered berries and plants, trapped small game, and made use of traditional knowledge passed down through the generations. Some adults took occasional wage work in Nahma, day work, dock work, cleaning, or seasonal jobs connected to the mill, though Native American workers were often paid less and had fewer protections than white laborers. Local history strongly suggests that Native children from Sandtown attended school in Nahma, particularly in the 20th century. While not formally documented in school rosters, this aligns with broader regional patterns where Native children attended nearby public schools when no reservation school existed. There is also evidence that public health services in Nahma were extended to Native families, including treatment during disease outbreaks and basic medical care. This care was limited and inconsistent, but it reflects a level of interaction between the two communities that went beyond simple separation. Sandtown existed in the shadow of a company town, but outside its power structure. The people there were not employees of the mill, did not benefit from company housing, and had little legal protection over the land they occupied. As Nahma declined and eventually changed hands, Sandtown faded quietly from maps and memory. Its disappearance was not marked by a sale or a closing announcement, only by the absence. Today, the sandy shoreline remains, the river still flows, but the story of Sandtown survives mostly through oral history, fragments, and quiet remembrance. It stands as a reminder that while towns like Nahma were built and sold, native communities endured, often unseen, holding onto place, culture, and identity long after the industries moved on. The Badenoch Lumber Company owned the entire town of Nahma, where they operated sawmills from 1881 to 1951. They also owned and cut timber on about 220,000 acres of the surrounding forests during the period. The company provided housing for people of European ancestry in the town near the mill. American Indian families were typically not allowed in Nahma's company housing, but could build on company land in Sandtown. Note, the sign says that Sandtown was on company land, but the native people were at the location prior to the company town. Most of the American Indians in the area call themselves Anishinaabe, which means original people, and includes the closely related tribes called Ottawa, Chippewa, and Potawatomi. During the Badenoch Company era from 1881 to 1951, they often worked in the winter at remote logging camps and in the summer at Nahma, loading ships and lumber. Anishinaabe living at Sandtown also gardened, picked berries, fished, hunted, trapped, made maple syrup, and sold craft items. Houses stood in the clearing along both sides of a dirt road in the same location as the current paved road. According to former residents, some Sandtown structures resembled company-built houses in Nahma, but most were tar paper shacks. Even though a few people lived here as late as 1970, there was never any phone service, electricity, or running water. However, former residents fondly remember gatherings like ghost suppers, where families prepared special meals and conducted traditional ceremonies to honor deceased relatives. In 1951, the Badenoch Company closed their mill, and many people left Nahma and Sandtown to find work elsewhere. The American Playground Company bought the land in 1957. After the last Sandtown residents moved out, they demolished the remaining structures, and early in 1970 they sold the parcel to the Nature Conservancy. Later that year, the site of Sandtown became part of the Hiawatha National Forest. Former residents of Sandtown and related family members recently joined Forest Service archaeologists, botanists, and other volunteers to share history and plant native species in areas where off-road vehicles had destroyed the vegetation. Also of note, there is no identification of the former community or the memorial on maps such as Google Maps. I just happened to stumble across it. Next, we're going to the Indian Point Cemetery, where residents of Sandtown have been laid to rest. On the way, I would like to share some information about a book I discovered when researching the Sandtown community, titled Sandtown Survivor by Laughing Sky Woman. In the book, she states she was born in 1941, which would make her 85 in 2026. She described the segregation of Sandtown and Nahma residents. The separation was made real by the Sturgeon River, as it segregated Sandtown from the good part of Nahma. She states that Sandtown was just that, a row of little squatter shacks sitting on each side of the road running through beach sand a quarter-mile from the Big Badenoch on Lake Michigan. She goes on to say that the name of the town Nahma is Ojibwa for sturgeon, named for the fish in the nearby river. She describes ongoing conflict with the area game warden over hunting deer and fishing rights. She states that hunger was the motivation for many adventures in their lives. They learned about hunting, fishing, snaring, stealing gull eggs, gathering wild food, cooning apples from abandoned orchards, logging and pulp cutting, gathering and selling things of the earth, making crafts, salesmanship, hustling white folks, and many other lessons in their efforts to have bread on the table. She describes that they began the little cottage industries of making crafts to sell to white people and tourists. Her family peeled the birch bark to make baskets and small versions of the birch bark canoe and teepees, as well as making baskets using porcupine quills. She states that the saddest story is that they were taught by the schools and the priests and nuns that they had to be Catholic, and that their native traditions and beliefs were false gods and superstitions which were bad. A Catholic priest would visit the area to hold catechism, and they were mandated to participate. She states that later in time there was a public health nurse, but they had a lack of dental care. As for the demise of the community, she states they got rid of all the squatter shacks in Sandtown in the late 1960s. In the book, Laughing Sky Woman states her family left Sandtown after their house burned down and they moved several miles north to the Thunder Lake camp. They then moved to Lower Michigan in the Detroit area where they continued to live in poverty. However, she reports she went on to get a PhD in clinical psychology and was a college professor, writer, and speaker. She retired in Utah. I tried to find more about this author so I could ask for an interview and to find her other writings and information about her speaking engagements, but was unable, likely because the only name given in the book is her native name. Her book is self-published. There is a way to contact authors through their Amazon page, and I did send a message but did not get a reply. It's possible she is no longer living. Now I'll share some information about some of the native people of Sandtown buried in this Indian Point Cemetery, as found on findagrave.com. Amelia, 61, beloved mother, sister, and friend, left this earth to be with her Lord and Savior. She was retired from the Grand Ledge Public School Transportation Department and loved transporting her students, especially her special education students. Amelia loved to travel and attended many Michigan Indian Elder Association meetings, and she went to the Anishinaabe language camp in Manistee each July. Joseph Maurice Campo was the brother of Amelia. He was a member of the Little Traverse Bay Band of Ottawa Indians. He died at age 58 from complications of cancer. He was a devoted father of 5. He enjoyed bluegrass and country music. John Ketchik II passed away in 2012 at the age of 80. He was a citizen of the Little Traverse Bay Band of Ottawa Indians and was an avid hunter and fisherman. He was the father of 8 children, 4 of which preceded him in death, 31 grandchildren, and 21 great-grandchildren. This is the sad gravestone that is inscribed Borshaw Babies with 4 babies listed. Rita died in 1946, Joanne died in 1950, Jean died in 1952, and Peter died in 1955. Each baby also has its own marker. No further information is available on these babies or their parents. Thomas Borshaw died at age 44 of a ruptured appendix. Rico Borshaw was murdered in a shooting at age 31. These are the graves of the married couple Rose and Frank Borshaw. Rose's obituary states she had 4 children, 17 grandchildren, and 15 great-grandchildren. Franklin Willis died in Virginia at age 37 in a car accident. His wife, also in the car, was listed in serious condition, and a daughter, also in the car, was not injured. He had 2 additional children. He was a shipping clerk and served in the Navy in World War II. George Willis died at age 7 from drowning at the mouth of the Organs River, which is near Sandtown, in Ogans Bay off the Big Bay Denak in Lake Michigan. Infant Joseph Michael Owl was stillborn. Paul Wagner, age 27, died by suicide after a conflict with his mother-in-law. He left a note stating his mother-in-law had been trying to keep him from his wife. He was a World War I veteran. Sarah Michaels, age 2, died after being brought to the hospital for an intestinal disorder. Swasha Moses, age 70, was born in Canada and died in 1880 at the State Hospital in Newberry. He lived in Nahma for 45 years. Leona Godfrey died at age 25 after being ill from an unlisted illness. She was survived by her husband and 3 children. Raymond Hardwick died at age 30 of carbon monoxide poisoning from a smoldering bed mattress. He was a veteran of World War II and survived by his wife and 3 children. Judith Ann Feathers was a member of the Little Traverse Bay Band of Ottawa Indians and died at age 70 in Escanaba. She was raised in Nahma and was taken to attend a boarding school as a child, and also lived in Minnesota and later Wisconsin, where she attended college. She worked several jobs for the federal government, including the U.S. Forest Service. She loved country music and playing cribbage and enjoyed learning the native language and traditions. She was survived by several children and grandchildren. Now let's take a drive through the town of Nahma, a short distance across the Sturgeon River from Sandtown. At the edge of a large playground in Nahma, the Northern Railway Locomotive No. 5 is on display. The town of Nahma was established in 1881 by the Badenoch Lumber Company as the base for its Upper Michigan lumbering operations. The company began harvesting softwoods, but as the supply decreased, it was forced to turn to hardwood logging. In 1901, the Badenoch Lumber Company began construction of a railroad system, the Nahma and Northern, leading from Nahma into the surrounding forest and various lumber camps. The railway eventually had 75 miles of track. The Nahma and Northern had 7 locomotives, 1 caboose, and over 100 Russell cars for hauling timber. The railroad was abandoned in 1948. In 1951, the town of Nahma was sold to the American Playground Device Company for development into a resort. The planned resort, however, never got off the ground. The Nahma and Northern Railway Locomotive No. 5 is a locomotive located at the corner of Main Street and River Street in Nahma Township. It is a 262 coal-burning locomotive built by the Baldwin Company of Philadelphia in 1912. The town of Nahma also has a very nice Veterans Memorial, a bed and breakfast, and a small country store. One building I came across which is absolutely stunning is the Nahma Township Historical Society building. It is in the oldest church building in Nahma and was built in 1904 as St. Paul's Protestant Union Church. As the first church built in Nahma, it began as a non-denominational church for the people of the community. In 1951, when the town was put up for sale, the Little Brown Church was deeded to the Episcopal Diocese of Marquette, and the final services were held in June of 2000. The Nahma Township Historical Society worked with the Episcopal Bishop, and the diocese deeded the building to Nahma Township for a museum in 2004. Unfortunately, when I visited Nahma, it was off-season and the museum was closed, but I definitely plan to return to learn more about this museum and go inside. It's one of the most beautiful buildings I've seen in the UP. Now let's check out the Catholic church in town, St. Andrew's, established in 1906. Behind the church is the Nahma Cemetery. Let's take a quick look at the lives of 4 people buried here. Joseph Juneau, age 64, died in 1924 of a heart attack while working at the mill. This is the grave of David Remington, who died at age 74. He worked at the Bay de Noc Lumber Company for 55 years. All activities of the Bay de Noc Company were suspended during the service, which was attended by the entire force of the company. The service was also attended by camp woodsmen, for whom a special train was sent early Monday morning. The crew of the Nahma Northern Road formed an escort of honor at the service. Amos Ritter was 64 years old when he died and was a World War I veteran. No information about his death was found, but this newspaper clipping is posted and reads, "The crew of the Nahma and Northern Railway train posed for this picture when they stopped for the Highway US 2 crossing at Nahma Junction. Automobiles speed on this stretch of road at 60 to 75 miles per hour, so the train crew flags the crossing to warn the motorist." Featured in the photo from left to right includes Fireman Amos Ritter. Here lies the grave of baby Plant, who was a stillborn in 1908. Less than 2 months later, his father was killed in a workplace accident. Before heading over to the marina on the shores of Lake Michigan where the lumber yard was and trains came in to haul out the lumber, let's take a look back at history and what happened when this entire town of Nahma was put up for sale. By the mid-20th century, the forests surrounding Nahma had been cut nearly to exhaustion. For decades, the town had existed for one purpose, to support the massive lumber operation of the Bay de Noc Company. When the timber was gone, the reason for the town's existence disappeared with it. By 1951, something almost unheard of happened. The Bay de Noc Company put the entire town of Nahma up for sale. Homes, businesses, docks, infrastructure, and all. The story was so unusual that it was featured nationally in Life magazine, capturing the attention of readers across the country. A whole town built for industry was being offered to anyone willing to imagine a new future for it. That buyer turned out to be American Playground Device Company. The company announced ambitious plans to reinvent Nahma, not as a lumber town, but as a combined industrial and recreational community. The vision included renewed housing, jobs, and a fresh identity for a place that had lost its original purpose. First, the plans appeared promising. Some improvements were made and limited operations were moved to Nahma, but the larger vision never fully materialized. The town's remote location, limited infrastructure, power restraints, and economic realities of mid-century manufacturing made large-scale redevelopment difficult to sustain. After American Playground's manufacturing plans fell apart and operations scaled back in the early 1970s, the company gradually sold off its holdings. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, much of Nahma was once again in the hands of local owners and community enterprises, marking a de facto return to local control. Today, Nahma is a small, quiet Lake Michigan shoreline community. The sawmill is gone, the docks and rail lines that once moved lumber to the world have faded into memory. Now let's take a walk down by the marina where the sawmill and railway lines once stood. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to my channel and continue to watch as I share my life living in a cabin on a lake in the woods and exploring all the interesting and amazing places in Michigan's Upper Peninsula.